Hey heroes, and welcome to another Canadian episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. Before we get to the main topic for this week, let's begin by jumping back several centuries and looking at a story involving the notorious demon Nightmare. A conceptual entity of cosmic power and enigmatic origin, Nightmare rules over his own realm in the dream dimension and feeds on the psychic energy produced by bad dreams. Roughly 800 years ago, he captured a succubus named Zilla Char and forced himself on her, leaving her pregnant with his offspring, before banishing her to a sub-matter realm from which she was unable to escape. Furthermore, Zilla's specific breed of demon was one for whom giving birth was always fatal, as mothers, in a sense, became their own children. What this really means is that rather than anything resembling a traditional birth, Zilla Char's body was enveloped in flame and consumed to form the daughter of Nightmare, who emerged as a fully formed adult with memories inherited from her mother. Dubbing herself the Dreamqueen, this new demon did not initially share her mother's hatred of Nightmare, as she found herself able to manipulate the reality within the plane of existence that she inhabited, much like her father could do in his own Nightmare world. She shaped this barren, ethereal plane into a vibrant realm that was later dubbed Live World, and created loyal subjects to populate it. However, as the centuries passed, she began to lament her inability to leave, and came to regard her dream world as a prison. We will come back to that in a bit, but first let's jump forward in time to just before the formation of Alpha Flight. During this time, the founder of Department H, James MacDonald Hudson, was recruiting Canadian superhumans for the flight program and developed a device to locate those with latent abilities that could potentially be unlocked. Meanwhile, a serial killer named William Nolan was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Determining that Nolan possessed latent psionic abilities, Hudson offered the condemned criminal an opportunity, and Nolan agreed to participate in experimentation that would adjust his behavior and unlock his potential. Of course, only the latter part of that actually worked, as Nolan mutated into a ruthless and cunning superhuman psychopath known as Bedlam, and had to be stopped by Guardian and Wolverine. In the end, Hudson succeeded in subduing and imprisoning Bedelum, sealing him within a life support cocoon, but of course we'll get back to him as well. Later, after the formation of Alpha Flight and the apparent death of James MacDonald Hudson, there was an incident in which the trickster god Loki attempted to win the favor of the enigmatic higher gods known as those who sit above in shadow, who demanded that he impress them by doing a good deed for mankind freely given. In an attempt to perform a righteous action, he granted humanity access to a mystical energy source called the Fire Fountain, which transformed a number of individuals, including members of Alpha Flight and several X-Men, into godlike forms resembling the Asgardians. The plan was for the effects of the fountain to eventually spread across the entire globe. However, this would wipe out magical entities in the process, and not only that, but any who did survive and transform would be robbed of their creativity and imagination. When Alpha Flight and the others then rejected this gift, Loki attempted to force the issue, but this meant that the boon was no longer freely given, and those who sit above in shadow forced him to undo what he had done, and leave without seeking vengeance. Now, with all that covered, let's really get started and jump ahead one more time and continue from our previous Alpha Flight video. When we last left our heroes, the team was being led by Heather Hudson, who took over after her husband's apparent death and donned a similar battlesuit to become the new Vindicator. Alpha Flight members during this time included Northstar and Aurora, the mutant twins with super speed and flight, Puck, the diminutive adventurer with decades of worldly experience, Roger Bochs, the mechanical genius with a robotic suit that he could phase into and pilot, and Madison Jeffries, the mutant mechanic with the power to psionically manipulate inorganic materials and Bochs' closest friend. There was also Dr. Michael Two Young Men, the First Nations shaman who had a falling out with his own daughter, Talisman, and usurped her magical abilities, but he also left the team around this time, so he's not really going to play a factor in this week's video. Previously, we talked about how, after a period of operating independently, Alpha Flight regained their government funding and moved into a mansion headquarters on Tamarind Island, off the coast of British Columbia. While there, the Alphans took in Kara Kilgrave, the daughter of the infamous Purple Man, who inherited her father's mind-controlling powers. There was an incident in which the half-goddess Snowbird lost her life in a battle with a centuries-old ghost named Pestilence, and her physical form was inhabited by the spirit of her disembodied teammate Walter Langowski, aka Sasquatch. This allowed Langowski to rejoin the team using Snowbird's ability to shapeshift into a white Sasquatch form, but the fact that he was now a woman prevented him from reigniting his romance with Aurora, due to her refusal to engage in a same-sex relationship. We also previously talked about Madison Jeffries' brother Lionel Jeffries, aka Scramble. To briefly recap, whereas Madison had mental control over metal and electronics, Lionel could reshape human flesh. However, while serving with the US Army in Southeast Asia, the horrors of war drove Lionel to madness as he tried and failed to use his powers to revive his dead squad mates. Years later, Madison helped his brother use his powers on himself to seemingly regain his sanity. However, Lionel secretly continued to obsess over the idea of modifying other people. He declined an invitation to join Alpha Flight alongside his brother, but subsequently failed to get his medical license reinstated. After that, he used his powers to save the life of a wealthy business tycoon who, in return, bankrolled a private research lab in Vancouver, the New Life Clinic. While appearing to be an ordinary private clinic on the surface, what lay below was a sprawling facility where Jeffries could experiment with using body parts from corpses to heal living patients. His ultimate goal, however, was the creation of what he called superior beings. To this end, he imprisoned several patients with superhuman potential while purporting to offer psychiatric care. And so now let's take a moment to spotlight the victims who found themselves in Scramble's clutches. First, let's look at a young girl named Laura Dean. She was the daughter of Darby and Susan Dean, the former of which was a leading member of a staunchly anti-mutant organization in Canada. When Susan was 3 months pregnant with Laura and her twin sister, doctors determined that one of the fetuses was developing into a non-human form. Unwilling to have a mutant child, the Deans agreed to an experimental procedure in which they would use targeted radiation to kill the abnormal fetus while leaving the other alive. When they attempted this, Laura somehow sensed the danger to her sister and instinctively moved to shield her, forcing doctors to abandon the operation. However, 6 months later, Laura was seemingly born an only child, and doctors were unable to explain what had happened to her sister. In truth, while only one of the girls showed outward signs of mutation, both twins possessed the X gene. When Laura's powers activated in utero, possibly a side effect of the radiation, she unconsciously sent her sister to the Dreamqueen's live world. Alone but alive and safe from her own parents, the unnamed sister spent her early childhood on Live World without education or guidance. She was found there by the Dreamqueen's forces, but the demon was fascinated by the presence of a being that she did not herself create, and decided to resist her sadistic impulses. She let the creature roam free, but kept a close watch in the hopes of learning where it came from. Back on Earth, Laura was a quiet and withdrawn child, and after being diagnosed with autism, her parents took her to Lionel Jeffries' New Life clinic. There, Jeffries used his own powers to trigger Laura's, causing her to open a dimensional portal and switch places with her sister, who had become known as Goblyn. While the two could switch back and forth, usually whenever Laura was in danger, one always remained in Live World, and Laura began to refer to Earth as Dead World, as the sisters both considered it to be a place of suffering and death. Next, we have Arthur Amadeus von Krieg, a heavy metal musician with a history of extensive drug use. His substance abuse continued to worsen over time, and eventually he was hospitalized and left in a vegetative state. He was transferred to the New Life Clinic, where Lionel Jeffries revived him, but reshaped his nervous system so that he no longer felt pain, transforming him into a mindless berserker known as Freakout. Next, we have an artist named Willem Vincent, who is torn over which of his passions to pursue. While little is known of his upbringing, as an adult he was diagnosed with both psychopathy and dissociative identity disorder before being committed to the New Life Clinic, where Jeffries discovered his latent abilities. A mutant as well, Vincent developed the ability to split into two independent bodies, with each of his two alters fronting in one of them, and became known as Janus, after the two-faced Olympian god. Next, Esme Fernando was seemingly a typical Canadian housewife with a husband and two children. However, psychological issues and the mounting pressures of domestic life weighed heavily on her. She eventually suffered a nervous breakdown that activated her latent abilities and was treated in a mental health facility before she was found by Jeffries and transferred to his clinic. Her power was to explode like a living energy cluster bomb and reform herself shortly thereafter, and thus she became known as Breakdown. In addition to these patients, Jeffries also hired a medical intern named Whitman Knapp, who was also a latent mutant. However, he remained unaware of Jeffries' illicit activities. Alpha Flight were also unaware of what Lionel Jeffries was up to, and sometimes turned to him for medical help. It was during this time that Jeffries treated Roger Bochs, which is something we touched on last time. To recap that, Bochs was a paraplegic mechanical genius who developed a robotic armored suit simply called Bochs. I will note that while some sources have referred to him as an amputee, the condition that robbed him of his legs below the knee was apparently a congenital one that his young son, Roger Jr., also inherited. In any event, it seemed as though an unlikely romance was blossoming between Roger Sr. and his teammate Aurora, and Roger agreed to let Lionel reshape his body into a more athletic form, granting him legs in the process. However, it was after this that her previous boyfriend, Walter Langowski, aka Sasquatch, returned in female form as Wanda Langowski, and Aurora rejected both of them. Dejected, Roger Bochs fell into a depression which was made worse as his new body began to degrade. You see, Bochs believed that his own mass had been redistributed when his body was reshaped by Lionel Jeffries, resulting in the slimming, but in truth, Jeffries had actually recycled parts from dead bodies to restore his legs. The situation resulted in Bochs going mad and attacking his teammates, targeting Aurora in particular. However, since Madison Jeffries had helped him build that incarnation of his Bochs armor, he was able to use his psionic control over metals to force Roger out and seize control of his suit. The fight was ended, but so was Roger and Madison's friendship. Mentally unstable and slowly reverting back to his natural form, Roger was imprisoned and brought to Lionel's clinic once again. This time, Lionel admitted his misdeeds to his brother Madison and his assistant Whitman Knapp before using his powers to render them both unable to speak or move. Meanwhile, when North Star wandered off for reasons that we'll touch on a little later, Aurora went looking for him and came upon the captive superhumans in Jeffries' lab. Things started coming to a head when Lionel convinced Roger to physically join with him, using his powers to merge the two into a single amorphous entity that dubbed itself Omega, the One-Man Army. This resulted in a battle between Alpha Flight and Omega, who possessed both Scramble's flesh-shaping abilities and Roger's inventive genius. In the midst of this conflict, the power to Jeffrey's underground lab was cut, and his captives escaped in the confusion. Meanwhile, Whitman Knapp's latent mutant powers also manifested, and his body recovered, generating 3 additional versions of himself, with each representing a different evolutionary stage of humanity. One was a 3-foot blob of sentient protoplasm that became known as Proto, and possessed corrosive abilities. Another, Ape Man, resembled a Cro-Magnon man, albeit with more simian feet. This one possessed considerable but not superhuman strength. The third, a relatively tall, slender human dubbed Highbrow, represented potential future evolution and possessed considerable intelligence, high-tech goggles that extended his vision beyond the normal spectrum, and the ability to teleport. Knapp himself was referred to as the Prime Unit and could direct the actions of his 3 counterparts. Collectively, the 4 would be referred to as Mannequin, and they quickly teleported to Alpha Flight's aid, placing the immobile Madison Jeffries within the mentally controlled Bochs armor so that he could join the fight as well. During the battle, Madison used his own powers to reshape the Bochs suit, allowing it to work in conjunction with his metal-shaping abilities. Omega's insanity also caused Roger's consciousness to re-emerge and regret his own madness. However, when he tried to fight back, Jeffries effectively lobotomized him, removing his capacity for independent thought, which in turn caused Madison to vengefully attempt to strike his brother down in anger. Omega survived this attack, but in its weakened state, the Purple Girl was able to use her persuasion powers to force it to restore Madison's body to normal. However, Roger was too far gone to resurrect, and Madison Jeffries refused to be his brother's keeper, finishing Omega off and killing Lionel once and for all. In the aftermath of that battle, Northstar fell deathly ill, but to explain that we'll have to jump back a little bit. Apparently he had been inflicted with some undiagnosed malady for some time, but was unaware of this until the team's conflict with the ghost Pestilence, which we covered last time. What we didn't mention was that during that fight, Pestilence sensed the disease within Northstar and caused it to worsen. This, by the way, is why he wandered off in the New Life Clinic, because he hoped that Jeffries would be able to cure him and went looking for him. Of course, by the time he found him, Lionel had already transformed into Omega. Desperate to find another cure, the Alphans sought out Loki's fire fountain in the hopes that its magic could heal Northstar. However, Loki took notice of this and decided to get revenge for his previous humiliation. Furthermore, while the fire fountain they previously encountered was connected to the realm of Alfheim, the home of the Light Elves, in its place Alpha Flight found a pitch-black fountain which was instead tied to Svartalfheim, the realm of the Dark Elves. With this fountain, Loki released Black Razor, the demonic sorcerer which the Alpha Flight member Puck had trapped within his own body. He also tricked Aurora and Northstar into believing that they were descended from Light Elves, and had Aurora cure her brother's malady by bombarding him with her light-generating powers. While this did seem to heal him, it also left her completely drained of energy, and she was soon captured by creatures from Svartalfheim. Northstar, meanwhile, was taken by Light Elves and brought to Alfheim. However, Loki's schemes were interrupted when those who sit above in shadow threatened to punish him for taking revenge on Alpha Flight when they had explicitly commanded him not to. Of course, Loki insisted that he was doing only good, as he mystically transported Aurora away from harm, sending her to a monastery in Quebec where she would be welcomed. He even claimed to have cured her of her dissociative identity disorder, although this seemed to render her amnesiac. As for Puck, while being separated from Black Razor robbed him of his reduced aging, it also returned him to his original height and freed him of the constant pain that came with keeping the demon contained. Loki then transported Puck to Tibet, a place he held dear in his memories and was elated to find himself returning to. While things worked out well for him, those who sit above in shadows saw through Loki's thinly veiled attempt to save his own skin and banished both him and Black Razor to Svartalfheim. At the end of the day, while North Star's life was indeed saved, Alpha Flight nonetheless lost 3 more of its founding members. As the team settled into their new normal, romances began to blossom amidst the group. The 2 young trainees, Mannequin and Purple Girl, slowly grew close, while Heather Hudson accepted that her husband was gone and started a relationship with Madison Jeffries. Meanwhile, their former government liaison turned Department H head, Gary Cody, began to worry about Heather's ability to keep the team's new roster in line. Seeking ways to control them, he investigated the old Department H headquarters and came upon the cocoon containing the superhuman criminal Bedelum, inadvertently releasing him. Using his psionic powers, Bedlam rendered Cody comatose and escaped before discovering the 4 superhumans that had been previously held captive by Scramble. With the ultimate goal of breeding a new race of superhumans at his psionic command, he recruited Freakout, Janice, Breakdown, and Goblin, dubbing them his Derangers. After that, Bedlam launched an attack on Alpha Flight that resulted in the destruction of their mansion headquarters. He abducted the group, taking them to a sprawling complex in the Arctic Circle, where he used his powers to give Alpha Flight and the Derangers a look into each other's memories before forcing the 2 teams to fight one another. However, as the battle went on, he found himself losing his grip on his pawns, who began to turn against him. In response, Bedlam slaughtered both Freakout and Breakdown and forced Janice's 2 bodies to strangle each other. Meanwhile, Wolverine was alerted to the killer's escape and joined the fray as well. In the end, Bedlam nearly succeeded in taking his revenge by slaying Vindicator, but Heather fought back and delivered a decisive blow, ending the deranged killer's life once and for all. When the dust settled, each of the Derangers had been killed, except for Goblin, and of course her twin sister Laura, who resided safely in Live World whenever Goblin was on Earth. Kara Kilgrave empathized with the feral mutant, and Alpha Flight ultimately agreed to take her in. Kara befriended both Laura and Goblin, and the twins became the next proposed members of the new training division, Beta Flight. As Laura grew to trust Kara, she even brought her to Live World and showed her the vibrant paradise that she shared with her sister. In the midst of this, Alpha Flight had another clash with their extra-dimensional foes, the Great Beasts. As it turns out, Somon, the Great Artificer, had survived his previous encounter with the group and was able to influence Sasquatch into sculpting an occult formation in the Arctic snow that summoned Somon, Karyuk, Tolomak, and Tundra. This time Madison Jeffries was able to use the mass of Bedlam's fortress to transform the Bochs armor into a gigantic robot that all of Alpha Flight could get inside of. The team ultimately succeeded in defeating their foes once again, but to vanquish Tundra, Madison converted part of the Bochs robot into energy and triggered a massive explosion that sent the machine blasting into space with the group still inside. Fortunately, Jeffries was able to convert the giant robot into a spaceship, but because it was formed from Bedlam's headquarters, the team soon found it infested with robots that he had built, which they dubbed Bedelumites. After exterminating these pests, the team prepared for a return trip to Earth, but while all of this was going on, the Dreamqueen was observing Laura and Goblin Dean as the 2 sisters traded places in Live World. Seizing her opportunity to strike, the Dreamqueen captured and tortured Laura, hoping to learn how the sisters traded places. Sensing her sister's distress, Goblin began to panic, and Kara used her mental powers to join their minds in an attempt to learn what was happening. While she did, Goblin leapt for the Bochs ship's warp relay circuit, causing Kara to inadvertently link her with the robot's bionetic brain. This confluence of circumstances caused the Bochs ship to warp through dimensions, bringing it to Live World. This led to a confrontation between Alpha Flight and the Dreamqueen's forces, as well as Goblin and Allura existing on the same dimensional plane simultaneously for the first time since before they were born. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Puck longed for new adventures and traveled to a lamasery in a remote Chinese province that was said to contain a doorway between worlds. At the same time, a Chinese military officer sought to seize control of the monastery, but when the monks there demonstrated mystical abilities that shielded them from conventional weapons, the officer called in a superhuman agent of their own, De Guan, aka the Jade Dragon. Orphaned at a young age when his parents were executed during the Cultural Revolution, De Guan grew up in a re-education camp and was forced to labor in underground iron mines. During one such shift, he was visited by an enigmatic geomancer who mystically imparted onto him the ability to shapeshift into a 20-foot-long dragon. When the country entered a new political era in 1976, De Guan, considering himself a patriot, enlisted in the Chinese army and used his superhuman powers in service to the state. He began to question his convictions when he was called on to attack a monastery of pacifist monks, but when he saw Puck there, he believed him to be a foreign spy and attacked. However, when the High Lama sacrificed his own life to shield Puck from the dragon's fire, De Guan was horrified by his own actions and turned against his fellow soldiers in an attempt to drive them away. Meanwhile, the Lama's spirit opened the monastery's doorway between worlds and offered Puck the opportunity to join his allies on Live World. However, when the portal opened, it was Alpha Flight and the Dreamqueen's forces who came through to Earth. With the Dreamqueen wishing to escape and take over the Earth, the Jade Dragon fought alongside the Canadian heroes in an attempt to push her back. The monks, meanwhile, didn't exactly join the fight, but they did use their mysticism to render themselves intangible, allowing them to serve as a distraction without needing to be rescued. In the end, it was Puck who tackled the Dreamqueen back through the portal to Live World, holding her there while Laura Dean finally realized her own mutant ability to create and control interdimensional portals. With that, she was able to force the doorway to Live World closed once again, and while Puck had sacrificed himself to accomplish this, the Dreamqueen's invasion was thwarted, and the Dean sisters were finally on Earth together. Meanwhile, fearing an international incident, higher-ups in the Chinese government called off the attack on the lamasery, allowing the remaining monks to continue living peacefully. In the wake of all this, with no headquarters to return to, Heather Hudson made the difficult decision to disband the team. While she and Madison Jeffries elected to stay together and possibly even marry, Mannequin decided to leave superheroics behind entirely and return to medicine, ending his burgeoning relationship with the Purple Girl. Kara, meanwhile, moved back in with her mother, who accepted Laura and Goblin into her home as well. But was this truly the end of Alpha Flight? Have we really seen the last of the Dreamqueen? The answer to those questions will have to wait for another day, and you'll have to let me know in the comments if you want to hear them. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. That being said, if there is anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!